Thank you. Hola, everyone. It's pretty amazing to be here today. I want to start by explaining a word that I will use to open and close today's intervention talking about Bolivia, which is Hayaya. Hayaya means long live. It's the indigenous language to celebrate life. So I want to begin by saying a big Hayaya to the World Transformed, to Alborada, to everyone in the team, to everyone here today, to our surprise guest, which is always a revolutionary leader who he shows his solidarity for Latin American every day, in and out. And I want to say that I hope that you leave today inspired, committed, and very clear what you need to do to continue to support the Latin American movement, our victories as well as our struggles. There is a little bit of an echo in the microphone, isn't it? So you could hear me a bit twice. So it's 2 for 1, 2 for 1. It's the generosity of socialism, isn't it? This shows that we're really radical, aren't we? So we really go for it. Right, so just to put into context, so let me start my timer. Just to put into context what the position of the plurinational state of Bolivia is within the current crisis that happens around the world, I'm just going to start by quoting the message of President Luis Arce Catacora at the recent United Nations session. He said that there is a multiple and systematic capitalist crisis increasingly putting humanity and our planet, our Pachamama, at great risk. That there is an economic, social, food, climate, energy, water, and commercial crisis, and that we really need to identify the origin of the problem that continues to produce domination, exploitation, and exclusion of the greatest majorities, and continues to concentrate the wealth in the hands of a few and prioritizes the production of capital before the production of life. So in other words, humanism before profit, whilst protecting our Pachamama, is what is key, the key message of the Bolivian people in our socialist revolution. So what can we learn from Bolivia today? Let's understand why we fight, and I really love your introduction. We fight, we resist, we fallen, we got up again. But in Bolivia, we have 16 years of phenomenal revolution, and I want you today to learn a bit more why we fight, why we resist, and why Bolivia will never, ever return to neoliberalism. So the first lesson, thank you, we're pretty determined. The first lesson that we need to learn is that since the election of its first indigenous president, Evo Morales Aima, and the social movements and the trade unions, led a revolutionary process of change. And that is the word I really want you to keep that term, process of change, proceso de cambio, which is a process in which we, Bolivia, are prepared to defend with our life if necessary. And you will learn now why I say with our lives very soon when I explain to you what the process of change has done for Bolivia. El proceso de cambio, or process of change, is set to rid all imperialist colonial practices across the country, to the deepest of fabrics in our societies and nations, reversing what for decades and almost centuries neoliberal governments and leaders did to favor the few and enslave and proactively make invisible the many. So this government had historically bled our national resources, bled dry, creating unmeasurable accumulated wealth for themselves and also for the Euros empires, mining our silver, taking our gold, stealing everything that they could. And also, which is, I want to mention, is very relevant to what is happening in the recently announced relaxation that exists for the private sector in here, is that it gave a special contracts, a special tax cuts, and the most, for me as a Bolivian national, it allocated lands in the thousands of hectares for these private sectors that then they went to exploit them and not give anything back to the communities. Something similar that I think is a story over here, you might say. So These highly subsidized reduced rates gave in return to the working class high levels of poverty, illnesses, because of the deregulated labor practices that happened. It attacked our trade unions, and nothing was regulated in terms of the labor forces. But that ended on the 1st of May, Labor Day 2006, when Evo Morales, the leader of the Movimiento Socialismo, más PSP, then president, nationalized Bolivia's gas, making it the first step to an economic revolution that led the plurinational state of Bolivia have again ownership and management of its national resources, using the generated profits to fund social development programs that focus on education, health, science, housing, and economic growth. So the list of achievements is long, and we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to put the most relevant, or not relevant, maybe the close to my heart, and I will focus on two to conclude my intervention today. One of the many developments and achievements in the government, the socialist government in Bolivia, was that we had an introduction of an NHS-style healthcare system, free for all. The construction of more than 1,000 health centers and hospitals. This is before the coup. After the coup, there are more data, and we don't have time for that, but it's as good as that. The creation of 20,000 items for health doctors and nurses. The construction of more than 5,000 educational units. There were roughly 29 educational units created per month during the government of Evo Morales' AIMA. There were creation of 50,000 job vacancies for teachers, construction of 8,000 kilometers of motorways, meaning that the communities were able to travel and to study far, leave their towns and promote unity to the country. And this is the bit where I'm going to put emphasis on. More than 150,000 families benefited from the donated free social housing plan. 50,000 families benefited with social housing loans, which is a very subsidized system to give families a new home. And the last bit, which is a remarkable movement, which doesn't happen in every country, and I wish countries that we know follow, is that every person, regardless of whether they contributed to the pension, received a pension. And this all comes from the income that was generated from the nationalized gas. And they call it dignity pension. And the two monumental changes that happened in Bolivia, which of course then led to the coup, is the recognition of the 36 nations of the plurinational state of Bolivia. Bolivia has recognized the nations of Bolivia making a plurinational state, giving all the nations of Bolivia and its people the legal rights, sovereignty, self-determination, and protection of our human rights. And the second bit was that Bolivia led a huge, enormous movement to distribute and redistribute land. 70% of the land was before with the private sector. Now it's returned to 15%, because a lot of that land was returned back to the people, to the peasants, to the farmers, to the indigenous people. And that is a major movement, a major economic growth for the country. Now, of course, this leads me to the last bit of my intervention. All this success is not good news. You don't see it here. You don't see it in the headlines in the UK. And this is what leads to coups, because they do not want a successful socialist country. They do not want to hear that Bolivia took people out of extreme poverty, that we increased jobs, that we were able to educate ourselves, and we're able to have equal rights and a new constitution that the country led, that the process of change led. And then is when we have the coup funded by the US, funded by, as we were mentioning earlier, funded by the UK. And this is the bit where I think it's really important to emphasize that all of the success that Bolivia's had, then it was thrown out because we had a coup that was paid by the empire. This coup, we were able to reverse in 1 year, but the only way we did this is by uniting and being united left. And I want to take a second to say thank you to everyone on this table who I know, and we as a movement, as Bolivian movements, we receive the solidarity. Without solidarity, we cannot move we cannot tell the world of what's happening in Bolivia because the newspaper weren't showing it. So this is where the importance of resisting, in our case from where we reside, which is abroad, outside Bolivia, supporting the voices of the Bolivian people in country, and being able to have the support that we have, for example, from the press, and everyone in this table I know has supported, and we are eternally grateful. The coup ended with 37 people dead, thousands were injured, 1,800 were injured, 1,500 were politically persecuted, and but we were able to push for elections, democratic elections. We won by a landslide. Ganamos, that's what I'm trying to say. And this is why it's so important that you guys continue to support us. Please visit Bolivia, document the successes of Bolivia, of the whole region, so we continue with this phenomenal movement. Hayaya Bolivia, Hayaya la Bellada.